Joining us now, NBC News White House correspondent Vaughn Hilliard, who's at the United Nations for us, New York Times chief White House correspondent, and MSNBC political analyst Peter Baker, and editor-in-chief of Foreign Policy, Ravi Agrawal. All right, so Vaughn, before we get to anything that he said there at the podium, I do want to play something he just said to reporters as he was meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky.
Do you think that NATO countries should shoot down Russian aircraft if they enter their airspace?
Yes, I do.
That was quick. Help me understand the president's position right now on Russia.
But it's a heck of a statement coming from this president of the United States. In the situation Article 5 were to be invoked by NATO allies, there is a question of whether the United States, under this Trump administration, would be committed to defending countries that could face incursions from Russia. And what we have seen over the course of the last 2 weeks are Romania, Poland, and Estonia all report jets, drones, Russian aircraft entering their airspace. And yesterday morning, there was an emergency UN Security Council meeting in which these concerns were raised and spoken directly to the Russian delegation who are here at the UN General Assembly. And the new UN ambassador from the U.S., Michael Waltz, his former national security advisor, suggested that NATO would not give an inch to Russia if they continued these provocations. But the question was whether the president would echo that today. And what you just heard, him sitting next to President Zelensky, hours after, we should note, the major airport in Copenhagen has been shut down over multiple drones in the region. It is not clear at this point in time, according to the UN General Secretary of NATO, whether, in fact, these were Russian drones. But the president suggesting that the U.S. would come to the defense and support the shooting down of Russian aircraft that enters into NATO airspace. And he was then asked whether the U.S. would potentially support that with its own military, and he said it would depend on the situation. But he said that NATO had stepped up. We have heard now for over the course of 8 years him repeatedly attack NATO, call for greater military spending among NATO countries. And the president just moments ago here at the UN General Assembly suggested that he was actually pleased with some of these actions. The other part, though, that I think it is important to note is that, again, the president has allowed one of those deadlines that he has set for Vladimir Putin to enter into a ceasefire and bring his war to a close. For the fourth time this year, he has allowed a deadline to come and go after welcoming Vladimir Putin onto U.S. soil. And the president was just asked at what point will he stop trusting Putin's word, and he said he'd give him about another month. We have heard President Zelensky repeatedly say in recent days that he needs the United States to step up and issue new sanctions. But he did suggest, Zelensky sitting there next to President Trump, that he liked his idea of putting more pressure on Europe to more forcefully stop buying oil and gas. A large part of that is going to come down to ultimately the close ally of the president, Hungary, and Viktor Orban, of course.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. And is Donald Trump saying he supports NATO shooting down Russian drones, along with this idea of threatening tariffs on countries who are buying energy and oil from Russia? Do they get, those two things coupled together, get Vladimir Putin to back off?
No, they don't. I think we now know that Vladimir Putin needs force. He needs actual pressure from the United States.
What does force look like?
Force in this case would look like actual tough sanctions on Russia. The United States actually has a lot more up its arsenal. They could use, for example, the frozen Russian assets. Actual force would mean being consistent and not flip-flopping as much as the United States has. When you look at how Putin in the last few weeks has had 3 different provocations against 3 different NATO members, that is because he's testing the waters. You only do that with impunity when you get the sense that your adversary on the other end isn't actually going to be tough and hold true to a treaty agreement. He's testing all of that. And the inconsistency from the White House this year especially is why we are there.
Peter, do you see more consistency coming? Do you see maybe more aid, military aid, going to Ukraine to push Vladimir Putin back? Is this Donald Trump? And Vaughn noted, which is so important to note, that he's already let a deadline pass. He has a tendency to do this. But are you seeing real signs, lately at least, that Donald Trump's understanding of Vladimir Putin has changed?
I don't think so. Not really. I think he's frustrated with Putin. He has expressed that at times. He has At times even suggested he understands that Putin is kind of trying to manipulate him and roll him, and yet he hasn't done anything about it, as Ravi just said. No new sanctions, no new military equipment that wasn't already approved by the Biden administration, no action of any sort. Deadline after deadline passes without any result whatsoever. And the only thing he has done for in terms of Vladimir Putin is to welcome him on a red carpet and clap for him on U.S. soil. So, Putin is taking a message from this. He's a crafty guy. He's been in power for a quarter century. He understands the way this goes. Right now, he's getting to do what he wants to do on the battlefield without any genuine pushback from the United States.
I think it's pretty clear, talking more broadly about the speech that he gave at the UN today, Ravi, and I've been covering Donald Trump now for a decade, that he and his team see that any opportunity for him to speak in front of a camera is an opportunity to not necessarily address who's there, but address the issues he wants to address to a domestic audience. You see it in the Oval Office, you see it at UN speeches, you see it at memorial services. They have a certain script or certain talking points that Donald Trump likes to get out there. And one of them is immigration. He leaned heavily on immigration today. And I wonder, though, as much as he's talking to a domestic audience, is there an international audience that wants to hear that as well? Is there an international audience that he is addressing, especially when he's in a room with the assembled leaders of the world?
There is, sadly. I mean, countries around the world are moving in an anti-immigrant direction. That's been happening for a while. I think one of the main things Trump has tried to do on immigration isn't actually deportations. It is putting a giant "do not come here" sign on the United States' southern border, especially, but frankly, everywhere, if you look at the H-1B news from last week. And I think countries around the world are seeing that. You'll see that pop up in the numbers in terms of who comes here for school, who comes here to work, who wants to come here and stay here longer term, who wants their families to move here. But, when you talk about this having different audiences, a domestic audience and an international audience, if I was a leader in Bangladesh or Nepal or Indonesia, I'm looking at this and seeing a president who's saying that green energy is not something we should care about, and you're criticizing the UK for going down that direction. These are all countries that are going to turn to China, where they're getting a very different message and they're getting cheap solar energy that is fixing their problems.
Because I do want to talk about green energy, but I want to get Peter first on the other, on immigration, because if he is talking to a broader immigration audience out there, and there has been, and we can put up some polling, there has been a rise in these nationalist parties across Europe. They actually are putting pressure on the leaders of France, the leaders of the UK, the leaders of Germany. There is a scenario where one of these nationalist parties, or three of them, are in power in the near future. Does Donald Trump want that? And what sort of relationship does he think he's going to have with national parties and their leaders if they are coming to power in three very important U.S. allies, Peter?
I think that is a goal, certainly of the people around him and probably Trump himself, right, to encourage the rise of these far-right populist parties that they believe are part of the MAGA movement, taking MAGA worldwide, if you will. And there's no question that migration has been a huge issue in Europe over the last decade. No question that it has destabilized mainstream parties, both the left and the right, by the way, in Europe, and that these parties that have run against immigration, much like Trump here, have had some, traction in the political sphere. Now, whether they actually get to the point of governing, still a very big open question, but he would like to encourage that, no question about that.
All right, let's talk about green energy. I'm sorry to stop you a second ago, because you and I were having a conversation before we came on air about China, and you said something which I found to be kind of provocative about China solving climate change, you think, or coming close to solving the issue of climate change.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
I was just in China a couple of months ago, and the statistics are kind of crazy. In the month of May, China produced new solar capacity that is more than what Poland consumes in an entire year from all sources. Just think about that. That is how much new solar capacity China could put online in 1 month. Now, if you are a developing country in Asia or Africa and you look at that and you can buy a lot of that solar technology for cheap, because a lot of it is cheaper than coal, you're looking at ways to solve your energy problem in the future. You are going to turn to China for solutions. And when you then compare that with a United States that is turning away from it.
Why would we not want to be a part of that?
I don't understand that. Strategically, I don't understand that. Coal and fossil fuel energy is the technology of the past. We know now the technology of the future is clean energy. It is here. You just need to get on board.
Is it as simple, Peter, as the oil companies give Donald Trump a whole lot of money? Is it as simple as looking to, the Koch brothers? Is that what it is? Or is it something deeper with Donald Trump?
I think it's both. I mean, look, remember, it was reported last year during the campaign that he got together with representatives of the fossil fuel industry and told them very bluntly in a private session that got revealed that if you need to give me, I think it said $1 billion, and then I'll protect you on fossil fuels. It was about as straightforward, a description of a quid pro quo as you get in politics. But I think you're right to say there's something also deeper here. Donald Trump is 79 years old, and he has a memory of the way things used to be, and he believes that we need to go back to those ways. And that is true whether it be, how energy is produced in this country. That's true whether it be the name of the Pentagon, of the Department of War instead of the Department of Defense. That's true of tariffs. That's true of all sorts of things on the cultural, political, economic, and security level. He is somebody who has a fixed idea of the way things should be, and it's rooted in his younger days, and he's trying to either get us back to those days, which he portrays as being a better, better time, but he's not, a forward-leaning guy saying let's move to the future in new and different ways.
Yeah, I understand the desire to look back and say it was all so much simpler then, but I think we can all look to Robert Redford and the way we were and say, wasn't it always complicated?